Recovery podcast is real life stories from everyday people in recovery. From mental health issues, trauma, substance misuse, and behavioural addictions. Please visit the website www.lifeinrecovery.co.uk for links to social media and a range of books written by your podcast host, Ren Coy.
Hello and welcome to the Life in Recovery podcast, episode 70, with me, Ren Coy. Hope life is treating you okay and you're doing well out there. The Life in Recovery podcast is sponsored by Dennis Berry Life Coaching. So Dennis is a certified life coach who's been working with people all over the world for over 15 years, and he can work with anybody anywhere via Zoom. He's an expert in addiction recovery and life mastery, and he's been clean and sober himself since 2003. And he can help you with your journey through sobriety and help you to achieve inner peace, success, and fulfill your life mission, whatever that may be. If you're sick and tired of being sick and tired and you're ready to make changes in your life, book your first free consultation by visiting www.dennisberry.com and use the code words Life in Recovery to get 10% off your next 3 sessions. The podcast is also sponsored by a former podcast guest and founder of sugaraddiction.com, Michael Collins. That was episode 20. He's helped thousands of addicts get and stay sober since 1985. During that time, his special passion has been to help recovering addicts who've turned to sugar after they got sober. Many recovering addicts struggle with weight gain, diabetes, and other health issues that all trace back to an addictive use of sugar. In most cases, quitting sugar is even harder than quitting drugs and alcohol. If you think you might need some help with your sugar addiction, Michael is offering a free copy of his book, The Last Resort Sugar Detox Guide, to all my listeners. I'm about a quarter into it, and it's seriously making me think about my use of sugar and how I'm going to quit. Just visit www.sugaraddiction.com/lifeinrecovery and download your free copy. And if you're really serious, check out his 30-day Sugar Freedom Challenge whilst you are there. The podcast is also sponsored by the Recovery Coach Training Academy from Helios Recovery. And this is for anyone who's interested in becoming a recovery coach. So recovery coaching is a form of strength-based, healing-centered support for persons in or seeking recovery from substance or behavioural addictions. Similar to life and business coaching, recovery coaching is a type of partnership where the person in or seeking recovery self-directs their recovery, while the coach provides their expertise in supporting successful change. Recovery coaching focuses on achieving any goals that are important to the individual. Helios Recovery Service is offering a digital recovery coach academy and ethics training on January the 25th to January the 30th, 2021. This training includes core competencies for recovery coaches with additional training on ethics, boundaries, medication-assisted treatment, gambling and more. Recognised as the original and leading recovery offering of its kind, the Recovery Coach Academy is a pioneering new approach to healing people's lives that is unlike any other training. Visit www.heliosrecovery.com and when you register, use the code words Life in Recovery to get 10% off the package price. Please don't forget that you can financially support the podcast if you're feeling generous. Go to www.patreon.com/Life in Recovery, and there's a few different packages to choose from there. I enjoy making the avatars for my Patreon supporters, and also if you want to dig deep, you can also appear on the podcast yourself. So check that out, patreon.com/Life in Recovery. Now, my guests today are the authors of Addiction Rescue, the No BS Guide to Recovery. David is himself in recovery, and Dana is not in recovery. She's his ex-wife, and they have 2 children together, and they have remained friends since they split up and divorced. This was an extremely insightful conversation into the damaging effects, basically, of addiction. So David was addicted to everything from sugar to heroin, hookers and slot machines, and he made tens of millions of dollars and gambled it all away. So hence the reason why he was divorced by Dana and his 2 daughters as well for a time, but he's now actually got a beautiful relationship with his kids. He also bankrupted an extremely successful brokerage firm and eventually lost his freedom too, and ended up in prison for 5 years due to fraud and money laundering. So it's a great story with a happy ending, because they have obviously remained friends and through David's recovery, and they have managed to write this awesome book. So without further ado, I give you David Marion and Dana Golden. So how did the book initially come about? So the book was called Addiction Rescue, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The No BS Guide to Recovery.
Yeah. And what was the premise of it?
So through David's story, which is very inspiring, as a lot of addict stories are, he ran the gamut of addictions and ended up, losing everything, almost his life as well. And ended up in prison, losing his freedom he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. So while he was in prison and starting his redemption story, I guess you could say, he started writing down things. And I kept saying, we got to get this on paper. You can help other people. So when he came out of prison, he had all these notes. And I just knew, and as now being a interventionist and a life recovery coach, I wanted to provide a resource for him to use with his clients and when he speaks, and be able to leave something behind with people. So we collaborated on putting the book together, where there's a five-step process to recovery, what you need to do to get into, even identify if you need to be in recovery, get into and stay in recovery for the long term. So that's really what we decided to do, is sit down, put a book together that could help other people that are struggling with the disease of addiction.
That's really cool. So you said that so the 5 stages that you talked about, what are they?
David, do you want to talk about that, or you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, you could start.
Okay, well, the first step is really waking up and pulling your ass out of your or pulling your head out of your ass, right? So basically, if everybody's telling you have a problem and you're still in denial saying you don't, you might want to take a look at why people are saying you might have a problem. The second action step is to understand addiction. And there's such a stigma attached to addiction that people don't want to look at it. Especially
your addiction, not just addiction, what you're going through. Every addiction might be a little different for each person.
Yeah. Agreed.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the third step is to find a solution that's right for you, because as we're all aware, there's a plethora of ways to get into recovery. There's holistic approaches. There's the 12-step approach. There's, so finding a solution that's right for you. The fourth action step is to do the work, right? You have to put in the time and energy that you put into your addiction to get in recovery. So you got to do the work. And then the fifth action step is the aftercare, because a lot of people go through 30 days in a treatment center and think that's it. But that's not it. You spend years and years using whatever your addiction of choice is, substance of choice, and you have to find an aftercare program, whether it's meetings, whether it's a support group, whether it's meditation or walks or whatever it is that you can find, journaling, whatever it is, to stay in recovery. So those are our 5 action steps. And of course, the book goes into depth on how to work each one of those.
Well, I wholeheartedly agree with those 5 steps. That's for sure. that is definitely the foundation, 100% for a successful recovery, I would have thought. So what was the story then, David? If you want to get into that.
The story is one which started at a very young age. I often said I came out of the manufacturer's plant a little bit defective. And I knew something wasn't right from day one, because I just didn't fit in. My mom tells a story when I was going to kindergarten. We were taking pictures that day. The school bus was outside, and I had walked in and out 3 or 4 times to change my outfit. At 7, 8 years old, I was so unsure already of who I was and what I wanted to look like.
Yeah.
I guess, we often say that's the beginning to our end. But for me, that's when I realized that something wasn't right. I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. And when I began to drink and use drugs, I thought that people liked me more and I liked myself more. I'm a guy that grew up in New York City, went to high school out on Long Island in the 70s and early 80s, the Quaalude era, and had a lot.
The Wolf of Wall Street.
Yes. Actually, I went to high school with those guys.
Oh, really?
We were very good friends from early on in life, and we did a lot of drugs and partied together. We actually, that country club that he came stumbling out of into his Lamborghini, I grew up as a caddy, a busboy, a car valet, a waiter at that country club.
That's a nice claim to fame.
That's what it was. But it's where I got introduced also to early on to getting high.
Yeah.
And my story is one, I graduated college. I went to college down in Florida, came back to New York, worked on Wall Street for a while as a stockbroker and a sales manager, and started making a lot of money at a young age, became very successful, introduced to cocaine, smoking it, and, going crazy. Eventually, there was an intervention done on me in 1989, and they were sending me on a one-way plane ticket out to Minnesota. There was a place called Hazleton. Now it's Hazleton Betty Ford. And that's where the journey, I'd like to say, began. And I got sober there, got really involved in meetings, going to a lot of different recovery meetings, had a sponsor, was sponsoring men, very active. Met Dana a couple years into my recovery, got married, had 2 daughters, ended up starting a gold and silver brokerage firm in Minneapolis, had many employees. And it was probably clean about 13 years, 14 years, and had a bunch of knee surgeries done and ended up getting put on prescription pain pills. And I was what I call a first generation opioid guy. When we didn't know the effects of it, we didn't know the addictiveness of opioids, and we didn't know how dangerous they really were. And from there, my life began to unravel because I wanted more and more and more. And I started buying them on the black market, getting as much as I could, any way I could. I had a nurse that was taking them from a hospital. She eventually got arrested. So one day I woke up and I was in so much pain, and a guy came to me and said, I could help you. He laid out a line. I snorted the line. He said, don't ask any questions. Now I'm hooked on heroin. And that began another run for a couple of years. I ended up getting divorced from Dana. I bankrupted this multi-million-dollar brokerage firm that we had started, and I was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. And that's really where the story, I'd like to say, took a new turn. Because when you're sitting in a box trying to figure out a lot about life, you do a lot of introspective work. And one or two things are going to happen. You're going to become a better man or a better criminal once you get out. And for the most part, I met some of the most interesting people and the most not so interesting people. And eventually when I got out, I knew that I wanted to write a happy ending to this story. I wanted to change the legacy and the narrative of the prior parts of my life. And I got involved I had gotten sober prior to going into prison, started a great AA meeting in prison. It became such a big meeting that the staff recommended people with addiction had to come to this meeting and sign in. And it was very powerful, just a raw, authentic down low meeting that you heard stuff you couldn't believe. And I enjoyed it, and I had done interventions earlier in life. First intervention I ever did is in 1992, and I knew that this is my calling. I got certified, and I've been working as an interventionist, life recovery coach, and really on the front line fighting addiction, getting in the trenches and meeting some of the most amazing people around this country. And that's what I do today. But, you know, the story has a lot of legs to it, per se.
So obviously you got sober the first time in AA and the second time in AA, is that right?
That's correct.
And
the second time I was kicking dope at a hospital, which was the hardest thing I've ever done. The nurse said after 3 days I came out of a stupor, and I said, "What the hell's going on in here?" And she says, "What do you mean?" I said, "Where is everybody?" She said, "Sir, you've been balled up in the corner making farm animal noises for 3 days. We kept bringing the food in, putting the cuff on your wrists to make sure you're alive." And I hadn't remembered a thing. I was so out of it. I was in so much pain.
And what you said, Dana said earlier that I think it was the third step was finding, the path that works for you, because obviously there are different paths out there. And similarly to you, I not only I'm a 12-stepper, but I've also worked in the addiction stroke recovery field for about 5 or 6 years now. Yeah. And my observation is that although there are many different paths to recovery because people are so different, the other methods of recovery don't seem to necessarily hold as much weight and don't seem to necessarily get to the root of the problem. That's just my observation and experience at this time, and that could obviously change in the future. What's your view on it, and what do you think are the kind of causes of addiction?
It's an interesting question because I'm a 12-step guy also, and listen, there's so many different types of recovery today. There's equine therapy, there's wilderness excursions, there's holistic therapeutic approaches, there's Solterra, ayahuasca ceremonies in Costa Rica that I just had a client go to, which is kind of like microdosing LSD for 10 days to clear the trauma of the past out. But the bottom line is you have to maintain whatever it is you do. There's a lot of different paths to recovery. You got to get on one and stay on one, right? Yeah. A lot of people like to dabble and see, okay, might be the easier, softer way. I don't have to go this deep and pull this shit from the roots inside. I don't want to have to take a look at this stuff. And that's where, the rubber hits the road. The more willing we are to become willing and open and honest about our past and embrace it and embrace the imperfections is where recovery begins, because that experience is going to help catapult the next guy and the next guy and learning how to give this thing away, this gift that we've been given. But when people want that quick fix to go, whether it's going to a place in Costa Rica, I'm using that for an example, and thinking you're going to have a 10-day trauma awakening, there's still other work that comes in once you get done. And I often have read reviews of people who've gone through it that said after 3 months, life is the same way it was.
Well, I've done it myself. I actually went to Spain and did an ayahuasca ceremony with the Shipibo tribe, and who had flown over from Peru, and it was undoubtedly the greatest spiritual experience of my life, and it was extremely therapeutic. But afterwards, the hard work began afterwards. The integration afterwards. It was like you said. I came back to my normal life, and it certainly didn't fix me. Right. All the work still needed to be done, and that was in 2000 and I think that was 2017 or 18, and and since then there's been a lot of work after that based on that experience that I went through that I've had to really work hard on to change. So like you said, it proved to me there's no quick fix. I think the reason why I did it was because I was writing about it for a book, and I kind of needed to know and understand whether it was a viable option for people, looking to find some sort of recovery and some sort of relief from trauma. And also, like one of the things, I think one of the reasons why a lot of people don't stick with 12-step recovery especially is because they don't stick around for the spiritual awakening, and they don't necessarily do the work to have the spiritual experience. And what that experience with ayahuasca proved to me was that it could offer you a massive spiritual experience that might turn the non-believer to a believer, or might at least open that door so that they could then work the rest of the steps. So definitely a viable option, but certainly not a quick fix.
Sure, and it's also a way to find might be a solution to finding a connectiveness with a higher power.
Yes,
that people
definitely
could not get in touch with. And when I was in prison, I was invited to the Native American sweats. And those were the most spiritual experience that I've had for the short term being. But when you're done, it's the same thing again. Once it's over, you want to maintain that feeling.
Yeah.
How do you go about that? How do you maintain that? And I often say today, there's not many people out there, especially working in the recovery field, dispensing a message on how do we really dismember and dismantle the power of this mental obsession to use.
Yeah.
How do we become the great disruptors? How do we understand and teach those struggling with addiction about the relationship between the mental obsession and the physical allergy of the body? That once we begin, we don't have a shutoff switch. So how do we disrupt that obsession to use? And that's all the connectiveness through our higher power, which I choose to use, called God, and that relationship to dismantle that obsession. And what are the techniques that we use? There's several different ones. But when that thought comes in to get high on a beautiful day, you're driving down the road, right, in sunny London, and all of a sudden that thought comes in, go get high, go get drunk, go get hookers, right? Your mind is like, wait a second, where did this come from? I'm sober, 10 years and this is going on. It's how do we dismantle that? How do we disrupt it? If we entertain that obsession, if we romanticize, if we sensationalize, if we ruminate on that, we're going to be sitting at that bar drunk as heck.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have that exact thing with chocolate, still, 10 years down the line, I have to battle that obsession for chocolate. The thought comes in, and then exactly as you just said, I romanticize it. And, I know it's not up there with the hardest of drugs, but, even to this day, I still battle with those addictive thought patterns. But interestingly, the year after I did the ayahuasca ceremony, I actually then went on a 10-day Vipassana silent meditation retreat. And my experience on the retreat showed me that connection that I got, massive connection that I got with a higher power through the psychedelics, I could also get through natural means of meditation. And that's something that I've been practicing. Well, I mean, I was practicing meditation every day way before that anyway, but it's something that is an integral part of my day. So I just stick to the steps 10, 11 and 12 daily program. And that works for me, and ultimately, like you said there, how do we dismantle those thoughts? It's like the old adage, isn't it? God is in the pause. It's if we just kind of sit with ourselves for a couple of minutes, it always passes.
Mm-hmm. It does, but we also have to take some action, and I think doing the work, our fourth action step, is really important. When we talk about what does it mean to do the work, right? Simple things like that. How do I release that obsession? How do I ask God to continually remove that? I still wear a rubber band on my wrist.
Yeah,
okay?
me too.
I have the obsession. I'll pull the heck out of that rubber band until my hand is bloody, right? Yeah. And then we understand it. You mentioned chocolate, which is very interesting, Ren, because I was a guy growing up, I loved chocolate. It didn't matter what type of chocolate, if it had peanuts in it, if it had marshmallow, if it had peanut butter in it. I love chocolate. I love chocolate so much I ate it every day. But if you ask me, do I remember the first piece of chocolate I ever had? I do not. But certainly enough, I remember the first drink of alcohol, because that gave me a profound personality change that chocolate didn't give me.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I concur. That's what I often say. Like if I'm sharing about that with another fellow or in meetings, that it's not the same. It's not that profound effect, is it? I mean, the first time I ever had a drink or a drug, well, the first time I ever had a drink, it lit me up inside, like the pilot light went on. But it was the same with drugs as well. I remember the first time I ever took an ecstasy tablet, and it was akin to a spiritual experience. You know, it was just like a synthesized spiritual experience. And whenever you have that, you know, whenever something has that massive effect on you, you're never not going to stop using it.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to bring Dana in. Dana, during this period then when David was kind of into his relapse, what was happening for you and how were you experiencing it?
Well, a couple different things. One of the other things that David became addicted to during that time was gambling, and unfortunately, I was the one that introduced him to Las Vegas because I half grew up there. And my dad lived there, so
that's the title of our new book, by the way, Ren. It's all our fault.
Yeah. I didn't know that was going to be the title. Okay. So you know, life was grand, right? It was fun for me. So we were going to Vegas every month, and we were, you know, on these shopping junkets, and we were, you know, going crazy, and we were making tons of money, and we had a house, and then we built another house in Arizona, and you know, the kids were having fun, and everything was great. And then it started not to be so great when the financial burden started becoming heavier and heavier, and that was due to the gambling. Which really is what put us financially in trouble and caused the bankruptcy of David's company. And so it got to the point where I, you know, because I'm not an addict, right, I can enjoy the things we were enjoying, but I also know when to pull back and say, we got to stop. And I tried to get David to do that with me, and he wouldn't. And so I stopped going to Vegas with him. And then he just kind of started going to the casinos on the Indian reservations here in our backyard, basically. And I wouldn't go there with him. And I would ask him to stop, and statements that had withdrawals at the casino, and he would deny it and say the bank statements were wrong. And so we went through that tumultuous time where I was like, we got to stop this, or we're going to be in more severe trouble than we are. And then when he couldn't, I just said, you know what, you got to move out, and you got to figure out how to stop and get your shit together, or you're not coming back. And he moved out, and I thought that would be the trigger, and it wasn't. And because, as you know, for an addict, it's just not that easy just to stop. So then that's when he got indicted, and I divorced him. Well, I shouldn't say that. I divorced him because he couldn't stop, and I needed to get off that train, so to speak. And then it was 6 years later that he was indicted, and he had bankrupted the company, and so I was already emotionally detached when all that happened. But then we have two daughters, and you know, so navigating with them, they were when we divorced, they were what, 5 and 7, David, maybe, and
7 and 9, yeah.
Yeah, and then when David got indicted, they were both in high school, and so, you know, their dad's face is on the cover of the business section, you know, days in a row for the indictment and the investigation, and the kids had to go to school knowing that their dad's, you know, going through this, you know, horrible time. And so anyways, just keeping the kids positive, and this isn't a reflection of you. This is your dad's consequences because of decisions he made, and you know, your dad's not going to take us down with him. These are his consequences; they're not ours. And you know, we're not just survivors; we're thrivers. So no matter what happens to Dad, we're going to be fine. And that's what I had to do for me and the kids, was to let them see that. Well, I've always told them a man is not a plan, and so we'll make our own plan. You know, dad's got to go pay his consequences, and we're going to be fine. So, and that's how we always were. We always maintained a relationship. I always made sure the girls had a good relationship with him. I took them to visit him in prison as often as we could between their sports and their things that they were doing. And, you know, I've never made it about David as David is a bad person. Dad has a bad disease. And all we can do is be supportive and wish him well. And obviously today he is well, and those relationships with his children are better than they've ever been. And he really works hard to make those people proud that he disappointed. And it's just been a great journey as a family and raising kids to show them the positivity even of a difficult, adverse situation.
It's pretty cool that you've managed to stay kind of friends, or I don't know whether you class yourself as friends or what, but family. Because it does, obviously, these types of addictions kind of ruin families normally beyond repair. So it's pretty amazing that we can all have this conversation together and that you've written a book together, really. I mean,
And Ren, that's exactly why we did it, because when you marry someone, you love them, you have things in common, you want to be with them, and just because someone turns out to be an addict doesn't make them a bad person and not the person you fell in love with. They just have a bad disease. And so that's our mission, is to help these families repair those relationships, to separate the addict from the addiction, and know that you can still love a person even though you don't like their behavior. It's like we tell our kids, we love our kids, but when you're acting naughty, I don't love your behavior. And it's the same thing with an addict. And so that it was so important to us to show people that you can repair these relationships and you can maintain friendships. And there's no reason to have to go through life bitter and angry and resentful, because as we know, you guys in recovery, that's no way to go through life.
Yeah, definitely.
You find out not more importantly, but importantly, is that addiction is a disease. It's a family disease, and the recovery is a journey. Everyone has been if the addict has been afflicted, the family members have been affected in some way.
Yeah.
Every family has a dynamic, okay? Whether it's the codependent, the enabler, the hero of the family, the black sheep. Every family has this dynamic. And once we see the addict in the family get help, other family members become lost as to what was their role. If they were the person taking care of the addict the whole time, now the addict is taking care of himself. What am I supposed to do? And that's where their recovery begins, to take a look and see, wait a second, I had a part in this as well. How do I clean up my side of the street? How do I stay in my lane to make sure that I'm doing what I have to do to grow along those spiritual lines, to put this thing back together? And a lot of families can't figure it out. And when I deal with a lot of these interventions, I see the brokenness of the family dynamic. I see it completely shattered. It's coming, they come to me. I'm usually the last person they call, right? Rather than the first one. But recovery is a process together. And you know that as well as anybody.
So I'd like to just take a couple of minutes to introduce you to my new sponsor, Bud's Life CBD patches. Now, Bud's Life CBD patches are completely legal in the UK. They don't contain any of the THC or have any psychoactive effects of cannabis. So these have got no psychoactive properties at all, which means that they're not a drug, they're actually a supplement. So these CBD patches take all the goodness that cannabis has to offer, but you don't have to worry about getting high, and they're just a fantastic way of managing anxiety or pain without any of the psychoactive effects. So if other methods of CBD supplementation haven't worked for you, then buying CBD patches in the US or the UK could be the best alternative. Go to www.budslife.co.uk, or you can check them out at instagram.com/budslifecbduk or facebook.com/budslifecbduk. And they are available in 16 milligrams, 32 milligrams and 50 milligram patches. And if you'd like to get 15% off your first order, just use the promo code Life in Recovery. So that's 15% off your first order. Just use the promo code Life in Recovery. Yeah, of course. I mean, my marriage ended as a result of my recovery. I was with my ex-wife for 9 years, and we got married as soon as I mean, I came into recovery in 2010, and we got married on that Christmas Eve 2010, and then within 2 years the marriage had ended. And I put that down to the fact that I got into recovery and I started walking down this new path, this spiritual path. And obviously I started to change quite a lot. And my ex-wife, I mean, it wasn't her fault at all. I mean, it was just a case of, I always say that, people either grow together or they grow apart. And she didn't really seem to want to come on this journey with me. And was
But
kind
they
of
don't know what the journey is at times, Ren.
No, of course not.
All
And she was
fairness, they don't understand what that journey is until we've lived it and lived through it.
absolutely. And ultimately, like, when you're a person as she was that hadn't done anything wrong, like she was probably thinking to herself, well, why do I need to change? You know what I mean? Like, what is it?
Absolutely, Ren.
You
I
know,
get
and
that.
and that was cool. I mean, it ended, and we've gone our separate ways, and we've lived different lives, and now I'm with a woman. I'm engaged to my partner, who, she's had. Well, this is what I wanted to get into in a moment. Is she's had her own life trauma, and that she's dealt with, and she's a very, very strong woman. She's raised two beautiful children, and now we're raising a third child together. And I just see in her this capacity to just know what the right thing to do is. Like, she does the right thing. She's honest. She is emotionally intelligent. She knows how to deal with her emotions. She knows how to deal with her obsessions and overcome those obsessions in a way that I don't. And it was what kind of, when I got into a relationship with Adele, it was kind of what made me really look at the root cause of addiction, because I don't know what your view is, individually or collectively, but my view is that it is rooted in childhood trauma, and the emotional kind of disorder, as I called it in my first book. Emotional disorder becomes mental illness, and then the mental illness is what we try to medicate with substances and behaviours. So that's my take on addiction. I just wondered what you guys thought on that.
Well, people have often asked me, do I think that marijuana is a gateway to other drugs? And my response is quite simple. I say, fuck no. Trauma is. Sexual abuse, verbal abuse, financial abuse. These are all gateways, because the pain is so strong that we need to medicate those feelings. And eventually, all we're looking for is emotional sobriety.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that is the hardest thing to attain. And Bill Wilson wrote about that in a lot of his early writings. Really didn't touch enough on it. And there's been a lot of research. Guys like Bill White and other researchers have done amazing, amazing studies. There's a wonderful woman doctor out of New York City who writes about emotional recovery. And it's just basically waking up without thinking about using, without thinking about not using, right? And walking on that spiritual path. But when you're trying to explain the spiritual path to somebody, like you were talking about with your ex, when they don't understand the trauma that we have gone through, and we all have some types of trauma. People say, is there one particular incident that happened, right? And I say it's a culmination of just so not being comfortable in my own skin, always trying to match my insides with other people's outsides. And every time we do that, 10 out of 10 times I got killed, because my insides didn't match my outsides. And we're always looking to connect with other people. And until we can match our insides with our outsides and become completely transparent, I think that's the first time we're going to feel some freedom and clarity in our life.
Couldn't agree more. What about you, Dana?
I did a lot of research for the book that we collaborated on, and through my research, what I kind of heard, and I think you guys being addicts can speak to this subject better of where it comes And I've had trauma in my childhood too. I did not become an addict. So in my research, I found that 50% of people come, come by it hereditarily, and I do believe addiction is hereditary. I know some people don't. And the other 50% is trauma, some circumstance in childhood, environmental trauma, whatever that might be, causes addiction. So I'm of the mind that it's a 50-50 split. I think some people just come out of the womb like that. Our daughter, our second daughter, Mimi, she came out of the womb and she was obsessed with food. Like she couldn't get enough breast milk, and then she couldn't get enough. I mean, the first thing she did when she learned to crawl out of her crib was go to the kitchen cupboards, get her fingers under the bottom of the pantry cupboard, pull it open, and pull food down. I mean, she literally came out of the womb like that. So, and David has addiction in his family. So I do believe there are situations like that. I think if you couple it with trauma, you're just twice as dead with addiction. Not literally, but it's just going to get you. And then I believe there's people that just have something horrible happen in childhood or trauma, like you're talking about, that causes them to seek something to mask the pain. So that's my take on where it stems from.
Well, I agree with that, because I think when you look at what addiction actually is, all it is the desire to act out dopamine enhancing behaviors, both with substances or without substances. So if you're in some sort of pain due to trauma, then find something that you can do that will take away that pain, then that can become addictive, because it literally changes your neural pathways in your brain, which has been proven.
Yep.
Like the brain is malleable, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So therefore, that would mean that if you've got family members who have already lived through addiction and they've changed their neural pathways in such a way that it can't be changed back. Like, I don't believe that I will ever be able to drink alcohol or use illicit substances ever again in my life, simply because my brain is wired in such a way that if I was to use those substances, I would go back exactly to the way that I was before. So therefore, if my brain is wired that way and I've just had a child, there is the potential that my daughter her brain could already be wired that way. So yeah, I agree. I think it's 50-50. And when I was researching my book, there was a Harvard study done, I think it was in the late 90s or early millennium, and basically it was about alcoholic rats, and they figured out that it was pretty much 50-50 environmental and genetic, but they said that there wasn't just one particular gene. It was like there'd be about 930 genes that would be involved in addiction. So there would never be like a magic pill that you could just take and it'd switch off addiction. So it all makes sense to me. I mean, it's both to say it. When I hear people say, "Oh, I think I was born an addict," and I hear some people say, "Oh, I think I became an addict," probably they're all right. And at the end of the day, what does it matter? It doesn't make any difference, does it? What really matters is the solution to the problem. And I think what David said, and that was following on from what I said about this emotion, this underlying emotional problems.
Right.
There has to be an emotional solution, and in AA speak we call it the spiritual solution. But when you really drill down on what the spiritual malady is, it is emotional problems. I mean, it lists it in the big book, and every single one of those problems is an emotional problem. So therefore, it's about learning to manage your emotions, quite simply, I would say.
Yeah. I'm having a thought that I'm just going to, and this is the first time I've ever put this together, and what a perfect platform, right, to talk about it out loud. I'm thinking about our daughter, Maxine, and I said she came out of the womb with that hereditary piece with food. But she also had severe anxiety and ADD. And when I finally got her diagnosed with that, she was in kindergarten, so she was 5 years old. The therapist, or actually the person that counseled her through her testing to find out what was going on, told me she had the most severe separation anxiety of any child she had ever worked with. So when I think about Mimi coming out of the womb, did she come out with anxiety? Because David also has anxiety and ADHD. Did she come out of the womb with anxiety and she was so uncomfortable even as a baby? She was looking for some kind of thing to overcome that feeling, and that's why she turned to food?
Well, definitely, possibly, because I mean, one of the things that we learn through 12-step fellowships is that the root of the problem is fear, isn't it? And if she's come out of the womb fearful, if she's like inherited that
Yep.
fear, I mean, was she born into life whilst you guys were together, and was
Oh,
it
yeah.
Yes.
and was that a good point or a bad point in the relationship?
No, it was great. It was
a
great.
good
That's
point. Yes.
Yeah, David was clean and sober, and we were great. And she literally cried unless she was sleeping. She was crying for her first 2 years, and
Wow.
she cried every time she woke up, and she cried every time she would fall asleep. And I had her at chiropractors and emergency rooms. We had nurses out to the house. Like, I was so wrong with her. And then finally, when we got her diagnosed and she had this severe anxiety, it just became clear that that's why she cried all the time. She just had these fears. And I can't even tell you, Ren, how crazy her fears were. Like, when she could start verbalizing, she would feel in the back of David's and my heads for zippers because she thought we were wearing masks and we were really bad people underneath. And she's like 3 years old, right?
Wow.
Feeling our heads for zippers because she thinks we're wearing masks and we're really bad people and we're going to hurt her. And then she got to the point when in kindergarten where she wouldn't go to anybody's house because she thought she was going to get locked in the dungeon in a house and never see her parents again. I mean, just the crazy
Yeah.
car when you'd pull up to a gas station thinking someone was going to pull out a gun and shoot her in the passenger seat. I mean, all under the age of 5. So,
Wow.
I mean, the fear that this kid came into the world with and was just like, how did she come up with these concepts at such an early age? It was just crazy. So,
Well, I was just going to say, all jokes aside, I mean, we don't know where we come from, do we? I mean, we don't know, like, none of us could say with any certainty where, I believe that we have a spirit or a soul or consciousness, whatever you want to call it, that actually moves on from one life to the next. So who's
absolutely.
to know what trauma she was carrying through from a previous life, potentially?
Right.
I 100% agree with that, Ren. Yeah, something
Which
tragic happened
basically,
to her. Yes.
yeah. And
To that
you
soul.
talk about your definition of addiction. I think one of mine would be addiction is an uneasiness that resonates in the marrow of our bones. Right? It's just something that we are just so not comfortable with inside that we needed to medicate it to feel comfort.
It's so true. I mean, anytime I've been on, when I've been meditating and I've kind of been meditating for long enough to reach a place where my mind actually switches off, what I've become aware of is that at my absolute core is this like hum of restlessness and irritability. It's like the Buddha said, that life is suffering, and it just really resonated with me. It was like, even in my seat, so to speak, where it's supposed to be the pure feeling of kind of nothingness, before I got there was this feeling of just like uneasiness, like you said, and to have that always present, it's no wonder we're constantly reaching for different fixes to make ourselves feel a little bit better. Because as soon as we stop for a few moments, I think that feeling comes to us.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's the great search, right? The 2 greatest days of our life, the day we're born, the day we realize why we're born. But until we tap into the true spirit of recovery to find our gift, I think for the first time, our purpose begins to illuminate. And when people recognize that, for the first time, they realize they no longer have to get high. They no longer have to drink because their purpose has taken a different path in life. But many people struggle to figure out, what is my gift? What is my purpose? Is there a path for me? Right? And that's what recovery shows us, that it's okay to be me. It's okay to be okay. Right?
Yeah, and I'd like to talk a bit more about that actually, because I mean, in my own life, I spent many years as a DJ and wanting to be kind of famous and and not have all the trappings that came with being a famous DJ. And when I eventually reached a place where, I mean, I never made it as a superstar DJ or anything, but I was kind of slowly climbing up the ladder. And it was interesting because I was a few years into sobriety, and I played the biggest gig that I'd ever played in my career. And it was that gig that was the end of my career, because I realised, whilst I was stood behind the decks and I was looking out over the club, this sea of clubbers, that it was like really empty. And I had this kind of dichotomy going on in my mind where I was like, this is what I've always wanted, but now I'm in recovery. I can see that I'm never going to be fulfilled doing this, and I'm always going to be fulfilled if I help other people and if I make recovery, the focus of my life. And from that point on, that was what I did. And then I kind of, changed careers and got into a helping career, and then the podcast was born as a result of that kind of desire to be of service, basically. And
yes,
what's really interesting to me is that, like, I feel very blessed that I've had that awakening, and that I know what my meaning is, and I know how to fulfill my life purpose. I just need to keep walking down this path. But it's interesting how many people don't have that, and I don't understand why they don't have that. It's a difficult one, isn't it?
It is, but it's also something that you said, that you get the constant reassurance that what you are doing today is a feeling that can't be bought. It is truly a gift. Because as a DJ, making other people happy and doing things like that does not compare with pulling somebody out of a rut who has faced addiction and they never had a solution, and you offered them a solution and created a pathway for them. That's the true spirit of happiness, the spirit of love, and the spirit of life.
Yeah, the spirit of humanity, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
Ultimately, it's what binds us all together. I always think back to how we were as tribes, and like when we existed in tribes, it was all about being part of the tribe, and that's what I feel in recovery. The first time I ever went to a meeting, many people say, don't they, that they felt like they'd come home, and I had that feeling and that experience. And even now, when I go to a meeting, I just feel like I'm part of this tribe, and I'll sit there and I'll be honest and talk about the way that I feel and what's going on in my life in a room full of people that I don't even know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incredible, because at the end of the meeting, somebody will come up to me that I don't even know, and they'll say, I really, really related to what you said, and then we'll have a lovely conversation and we'll become friends. And that's been my experience so far. It's true humanity and a true tribe in the kind of purest sense.
Yes. Because who gets this thing and who doesn't get this thing is not up to us. But if we are fortunate enough to get this thing and tap into this thing called recovery, there is a responsibility that goes along with that. And for us, it's to offer that love to the newcomer that comes crawling in these rooms the same way we were offered that, to give them the love and support until they're able to love themselves and until the light goes on inside of them. And that's the feeling that we give, which makes us feel so complete and whole. And I will tell you one quick story. I did an intervention in North Dakota in a remote place. The woman was a registered nurse, and they had called me and said she's doing too much meth. I said, how the heck do you know that? They said, every other nurse is seeing 3 patients a day. She's seeing 9. I said, okay. They tested her, sure enough, came back positive for meth. Ended up losing her registered nurse license for 2 years. I ended up doing an intervention, taking her into Minneapolis to a beautiful facility, Hazleton Eddie Ford facility. After 30 days, she says, now what? I said, extended care. She ended up doing 4 months in a halfway house. After 4 months, now what? Woman sober living. She did that for another 3-4 months. I get many opportunities to speak in this country, and I was called by the University of Minnesota to speak to 150 graduate nursing students. I called my friend. I said, I'm speaking tomorrow morning at 8:30. Meet me there at 8:15. She says, I'd love to see you. 8:15, she shows up. And I said, by the way, you're speaking today too. She says, what? I've never done this. I'm 10 months sober. I don't know. Please. I said, I will introduce you. Well, once I introduced her and she began to tell her story, Ren, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. This is a registered nurse for 25 years talking to graduate nursing students. When we were done, they were coming up and thanking her and hugging her. We walked off the stage, and as we're walking to the car, she looked at me and she said, David, I have been wanting to feel this at the bottom of the dope bag, the bottom of the bottle my whole life, and I found it today. And I stopped and looked at her, and I'm a big guy, and there were some tears rolling. It was the most beautiful moment. That's why we do this stuff.
Yeah, man. Amen to that. It's like there's such a massive emotional payoff from just being honest and helping people and telling your story. And, you know, like you said, just especially when you know that that person is getting something from it, you know, and yeah, it's an amazing thing. I wanted to say to ask Dana as well that she mentioned, you know, that you said that you'd kind of had your own trauma in your childhood. What are the reasons why you think that you've been able to manage your emotions and to deal with your trauma?
Well, I don't know if you'd call it trauma. My dad was an addict. So, you know, I grew up as a very enabling, codependent personality, which is why I've been attracted to addicts all my life, because of coming through that. But I got into therapy when I came to Minnesota in 1991, and I've been in therapy ever since. So that was really how I overcame all of, you know, recognizing and reading through books and therapy, recognizing the emotional handicaps that I had because I was raised by an addict, and coming into my own as far as, you know, getting an emotional IQ, which I had zero of when I got here, you know, so
you've done your own work as well, essentially.
Oh yeah. Always. Yeah. I'm a seeker of personal growth for sure.
And Dana grew up with a very, you know, her dad was a tough guy. You know, she witnessed a lot of things that most people do not ever want to witness.
Yeah.
Really a lot of overt stuff, sexual abuse, things like that. That's really that she had to work.
Well, not overt.
Covert. Excuse me.
Yeah, covert sexual abuse that I didn't, you know, it's interesting because we talk about the different kind of abuses that we get subjected to, and a covert kind of abuse, you can't put your finger on it, which is really a mind fuck, right? Because if there was overt sexual abuse, you can say, hey, I've been abused. I know what that is, and I understand why I'm messed up. But covert, when there's actually no what we consider sexual abuse, there's no physical signs of the sexual abuse. It's just a head game because something's wrong, but they didn't cross that line, so I don't know what's wrong. So it's an interesting thing.
And one of the stories that I remember that resonated was that Dana said she would come home from school. Her dad would be wearing a Speedo bathing suit, smoking pot downstairs with her high school friends. You know, that's really normal.
And showing them pornos.
Yeah. So it was all just a bit wonky.
Yeah.
Oh, very wonky. But, you know, I just thought I had a cool dad because he was smoking pot and hanging out with my friends showing him pornos, right? That just makes your dad cool. Like, you don't know as a teenager that that's just wrong when that's what you grow up with.
Well, are you familiar with Vince Filletti's ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experience?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I mean, before I was believe it or not, I was only introduced to that a couple of years ago. I'd never heard of it before, and it made total sense. But prior to that, I'd already figured out in my own mind that, it seemed, because I used to work in prisons, you see. So I worked, when I started working in the prisons, and I was working as a drug and alcohol counsellor. So I then became exposed to hundreds and hundreds of men from all different ages, from all different walks of life. And what I kind of realized was that addiction is on a gradient, and the more trauma a person had suffered, taken out of the equation the genetic component, but the more trauma a person had suffered, generally the further down the line they'd go. So if there was loads of physical, sexual, financial and mental abuse going on in that person's life, then they tended to end up a heroin addict on the streets. Whereas if it was kind of, a mild trauma in the life, they would maybe end up as a mild kind of alcoholic. And although that's very simplistic, that was the kind of picture that I was building up in my mind. And then when I was introduced to the Adverse Childhood Experiences scoring system, it made total sense to me that if you were exposed to 4 or more of these particular experiences, that your likelihood of becoming a dependent drug user was astronomically higher. So it's kind of been proven, but the weird thing is that information isn't really mainstream. Is that the case over in America?
I've never heard of this book, Ren, or this person.
Okay, yeah, well, there you go. So that just kind of really does hammer the point home. It's if you just Google it, it's called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Experiment, and it was in the 1970s. So this information has been around for years and years and years, and it only started to become prevalent in my line of work a couple of years ago. And that was the first time I heard about it, and I just couldn't believe that it isn't common knowledge, because it literally is a simple case of the more trauma you suffered, the more likely you are to become a substance addict or even a behavioural addict.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay, I'm definitely going to look that up. Thank you.
Yeah, the past they talk about had such an impact on the future.
Yeah, because I mean, the really weird thing about it was that initially it was working with women that were obese, and I can't remember. I think it was he was counselling these women and basically started them asking questions about their life, and what he realised was that every single one of them, more or less, had sexual abuse in their childhood, and so he put this series of questions together, and they were all answering yes to all these questions, and it was all to do with like sexual abuse. Was there anybody in the household that was an addict? Was there any criminality in the household?
Right, violence.
Violence. Did your parents split up? Like, basically all the traumatic events that you could think of that happened to a child. Well, if you had 4 or more of them, then that was it. Case closed. You were going to be, a substance or behavioural addict in later life. And to know that information exists and is out there, and to know, like all the work that we do collectively, in the States and the UK and across the world, you would think that we'd all be singing from the same hymn sheet. We'd all be fully aware of that information and building our programs accordingly.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm definitely going to look that up. That is so interesting.
Yeah, Hazleton does something on that also. There's a lot of treatment centers right now that are talking about their prevention resources, such as ACEs, that they're using.
And that takes me back to the psychedelic side of things as well, because I think it was when I was kind of researching one of my books that I was writing, that was where I kind of got the idea from. I was thinking to myself, well, because obviously I've been through the 12-step fellowship, 12-step program. I've been through the 12-step program in multiple fellowships, actually, because, as I've dealt with one addiction, I always say that addiction is like a game of whack-a-mole. You know, you whack one down and it pops up in another area. And and for me, you know, initially it was like alcohol. I put the alcohol down, and then it was sex and relationships, and you know, I then went into SLA and did the 12 steps in that fellowship, and then it was food, and I went to OA and did the steps in that fellowship, and you know, and it's just been this continual, you know, action, basically, like continually just working the steps and continually looking at all these different areas. And I've lost my train of thought now.
Oh,
Never mind. But the point I was trying to get to was that, you know, it's about getting to the root of the issues, isn't it? And sorry, psychedelics, that's what I was talking about. So I then went and did this ayahuasca experience, and no word of a lie, like this was a 10-hour psychedelic experience that literally got to the root of causes and conditions of what was going on for me. And do you know, at the very, very heart of it all, it boiled down to one simple thing, and that was self-love. It simply was about self-love. And you know, all the way through my life, I mean, obviously I knew my parents loved me, and I knew that my partner loved me, and I knew that my stepkids loved me, and I knew that my friends loved me, but I just couldn't feel it. You know, there was always this nagging sense at the root of me that it wasn't true, that they didn't really love me, you know, that they didn't really necessarily like me, whoever they are. And during that experience, it was flipped round, and it was just made very, very clear to me that they do love you, you know, and it's about you loving yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point on, that was why I said from that point on, that was why the hard work really started, because I came back to my normal life and I was like, okay, I need to remember this now, and I need to put this into practice, and I, you know, and I have done ever since. And as a result, I'm much happier.
awesome.
Yeah.
That was very sad, Ren. I'm so glad that you got that sorted out.
Yeah, me too. And I just don't think that. I mean, well, no. What I was going to say was I don't think that I could have got that through the 12 steps, but I think I could, but I just think that it probably would have taken me much longer. And you know, because I did counselling for many years, you know, and I would sit with counsellors and I would talk about the same things over and over again, and you know, it was there staring me in the face the whole time. And it isn't so much the fact that the 12 steps or counselling didn't already tell me that. It was just the fact that kind of really hit it home for me. So, you know, that's why I would say that it's a viable form of therapy. But it doesn't mean to say that other people can't get that through you know, traditional means. And it sounds to me as though you guys have done that anyway.
For sure.
Yep. Just other means. Like you say, yeah.
It's kind of like whatever works for you, isn't it? I mean, I'm sure that David can speak to this. That, you know, all the different types of people that you work with, it must be quite obvious that you've just got to figure out what works for that person.
You really do, and it takes a lot of listening, and it really sometimes people are silently begging to be led. But in order to be led, you have to hear them. You have to understand their pain, and the connectiveness of identifying with another person's pain is sometimes what it takes before you could figure out what it is that they really need. And usually people will tell you, but you have to be willing to listen and talk to them. And, you know, in this business, we hear things and meet people that, you know, probably no one has ever shared with before.
Yeah.
An interventionist, I hear stuff that, you know, often people say, I've never told anybody this in my life. I was doing an intervention in New Haven, Connecticut on a 31-year-old young man, heroin addict, big Italian family on the East Coast. And I often said, you know, what did they bring to the intervention? Food, you know, pasta fazool, manigad, and ravioli. I said, I've never seen food at an intervention. I don't know whether we eat during, before, after. Sure enough, halfway through the intervention, this young man decides to get up and he's leaving. He cannot talk. He is incensed. He's foaming at the mouth. His mom yells, "Sit down." And I look at her and I said, "Please, I have this." And this was in a hotel conference room in Connecticut. And he walks out and he heads out into the parking lot, and I follow him. I go with him. He cannot speak. He is just so upset right now. He opens up his car door, grabs a cigarette, lights it up. Now he proceeds to open his trunk. And I'm thinking, oh boy, baseball bat, 3-iron, what's it going to be today, right? And he pulls out a pad of paper and a pen. And he still can't talk. And he begins to write. And I said, "Bobby, get it out, Bobby, get it all out." And Bobby keeps writing and writing. And finally he rips it out, hands it to me. And I read it, and it's about the sexual abuse and physical abuse he endured as a child that not one of his family members in that room knew about. And I looked at him and I gave him a big hug and I said, "It's over, Bobby. You don't have to keep feeling the way you're feeling and living like this anymore." And I took his lighter and I lit it in there in the parking lot. And we went back inside. But he had to release this. And there was a blockage that was impeding his recovery. He could not get through this intervention without getting this out. And a lot of times people have that blockage that will not let them recover because there's something that is so daunting and so pressing and so impeding in their life that it's so painful. And like you said, people have got to be able to talk about this somewhere along the line. And if we have to be on the front line listening to this, well, that's fine. If that's what's going to help them get in recovery. And we went through the rest of the intervention, and it was a success, and escorted him off to treatment, you know?
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that is just it. Oh, so true. Like the blockages, you know, I mean, I remember the morning after my last drink when I had enough and I surrendered and I got down on my knees and I said this prayer of help, please just help me. And I stood up from that prayer and it just felt like this blockage had been removed from like around my heart. It was just, you know, just felt like such a massive relief. And when I did my step 4, I had that relief and that, you know, that feeling of blockage had been removed. When I did the ayahuasca, I felt like this massive blockage had been removed. So, you know, and there's been many times when I've been meditating or I've been writing things down, like what happened with that guy, where these blockages have been removed. It really just boils down to using whatever means necessary to get it out, doesn't it? To just be
Sure.
truthful and open and you know, and just share it basically. Like once it's out, it's doesn't hold any power over you anymore.
That's right. Which is part of the maintenance part of the program, 10, 11, and 12, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Constantly moving through and, you know,
Well,
releasing.
I heard a cool thing the other night actually, which I hadn't really considered before. But the guy said, you know, if you do a step 10 every night, you'll never have to.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I was like, yeah, that's a good thing to remember because doing a step 4 is quite an upheaval. I just wanted to ask you, David, what does life in recovery mean to you?
Life in recovery means enjoying the day, enjoying the present, enjoying really what it really feels like to be able to be alive for the first time. You know, when I was using, I was so riddled with fear and anxiety of living in tomorrow with things that had to come, whether it's, you know, sentencing in court or whatever it might be, always something, or living in depression and resentment of living in yesterday. And really, recovery is all about living in today and enjoying. This is all we have. Yesterday's gone, beyond our control. Tomorrow hasn't come. Enjoy the moment, enjoy the day, living in the present. This is life right now. This call that we're on, this podcast is as good as it's going to get for, you know, really November 26, 2020. And that's it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's lovely. It's never been more prevalent as well at the moment, has it? Keeping it in the day.
That's right. 2020 has been a tough year. There has been a tremendous epidemic prior to this pandemic. And what we're seeing is the carnage and fallout I've never seen before and witnessed. People with long-term sobriety relapsing, people with short-term sobriety, people looking for sobriety, families that are suffering, suicides, overdoses. Exponentially, these numbers are increasing from a year ago. And next year, they're probably going to be even worse. And people are really begging for a solution, because if addiction is a disease of isolation and loneliness, and they're isolating their loneliness, they're lonely with the sheltering in place. And why are so many people using right now? Well, so many people are working from their home. The liquor cabinet is 16 feet from their office. The refrigerator is 12 feet. They've walked by it 92 times in a day. You don't think the obsession to drink or to eat or to smoke has gone off several hundred times? There's no structure anymore. When you go to work, you have a meal in the morning for breakfast, then you have a lunch, and then you have a dinner. And now there's no structure in place being at home. And it's the same thing with addiction. The obsessiveness and compulsiveness is so powerful that many people are reaching for that solution, which is connectiveness to community, connectiveness to each other. There's nothing like sitting in a meeting where a guy cuts open his veins and pours it out to you. We're not seeing it so much on a Zoom call. When you go into a meeting and someone starts opening up and you look at them and say, my God, I really loved your share. Would you love to get coffee and talk about it? And they'd say, sure. But if you do that in a Zoom meeting today, they're looking at you like, who is this dude creeping on me? Right? The effectiveness is gone and the change with it.
Yeah. It's definitely been a lifeline, but there's nothing like the live show, is there?
No, absolutely not.
No, that's beautiful. Thanks very much for that. And Dana, what about you? How's your life these days? How's life in recovery for you?
Well, I'm not other than I guess I'm not in recovery. I just and take care of myself a lot better these days. But I definitely don't consider myself in recovery, especially because I still drink. So, but that's just never been an issue for me. But life is good. I'm taking this time in this present state of the pandemic where I'm stuck in place to write my second book. I think everybody's writing right now.
Yeah.
If you have a book in you, this is a great time to get it out. So it's been great for my progress in those endeavors, and just sitting tight and waiting till it returns to normal. David's down in Florida with our girls. I'm here. So I help a 86-year-old woman. And so I am definitely being extra cautious in order to protect her. So I don't do a whole lot these days. But life's good. I make the best of it in every moment.
So I'm going to change the narrative a little bit. Okay.
Okay.
Dana is in recovery per se. Recovery doesn't always have to be from drugs and alcohol. It could be from events that happened in our life.
Yeah.
It's the reclaiming and rebirth of a new way and an awakening towards different things. So recovery doesn't have to mean that we're abstinent from one particular drug or alcohol. It's the changing of behaviors and lives. And I think Dana has done that through the course of works and studies and therapies.
Yeah, and also I think that she's in your recovery as well, isn't she? She's part of your life.
Absolutely.
And it's, like you said, it's a family illness and it's a family recovery, I believe, as well. I think that everybody recovers together.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a good idea to have your ex-wife as your sponsor, but,
I definitely agree. I am on a spiritual path. I very much in David's life. We work together on this, getting the word out there, helping as many addicts and their families as we can. When I hear the word recovery, I always think, oh, well, I can't say I'm in recovery, because if somebody sees me have a drink, they're going to say, oh, she relapsed. So I guess I associate that recovery word with more of abstaining from something, but I do abstain from crazy mental thoughts and obsessive thinking, because I
definitely
in
in recovery then.
Yeah,
Exactly.
And on the flip side to the recovery coin is the discovery coin. I really liked. I had a guest on a few months ago, and he said, "I don't like to call it recovery. I like to call it discovery." And I was like, "That's actually really cool. It's whatever works for you." And if it's
I'm going to use that, Ren. I'm
Yeah.
stealing that.
Yeah.
Because that's perfect for my situation. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, definitely. I really liked it as well. And also on the book writing, I've managed to finish my 5th book in this time period, and I've just got it. It's just been signed to be published. So I'm finally going to get a book published, which is really exciting, and that should be out at the back end of summer next year. So it's been really kind of productive time for me as well.
Well, congratulations on that. That's wonderful. That is an incredible accomplishment. And not many of us sat in the guidance counselor's office at 17 years old and say, where do you see yourself in 30 years? Certainly wasn't publishing books and writing about recovery, right?
Definitely not. Well, thank you very much for today, guys. Anyway, it's been an absolute pleasure. And we find you online.
You can find us online. I am David at theliferecoverycoach.com. My website is theliferecoverycoach.com.
Yep.
Our book is Addiction Rescue, the No BS Guide to Recovery. My phone number is 612-849-7509. And Dana's?
I'm at Dana at danagolden.com. And my website is just danagolden.com. And my phone number is 612-968-1490. If anybody should need a little family recovery.
Beautiful. Thank you very much for your time today, guys. It's been really, really lovely talking to you, and good luck with everything in the future.
Wonderful.
Really, really great meeting you and connecting with you, and very enjoyable. And God bless, my friend. It's been great. Look forward to doing something again someday.
Yeah,
totally.
Cool, definitely. Thanks for listening, and if you've been affected by any of the issues discussed in the podcast, please see a range of mutual aid organisations in the show notes. Also, don't forget that you can support the Life in Recovery podcast by visiting patreon.com/Life in Recovery, and the podcast is sponsored by Dennis Berry Life Coaching. Go to www.dennisberry.com for your free consultation and use the code words Life in Recovery to get 10% off your next 3 sessions. Also, go to www.sugaraddiction.com/Life in Recovery and download your free copy of the Last Resort Sugar Detox Guide. And if you're really serious about quitting sugar, check out his 30-day Sugar Freedom Challenge whilst you are there. The podcast is also sponsored by Helios Recovery Services, the Recovery Coach Training Academy. Visit www.heliosrecovery.com to register for the Digital Recovery Coach Academy and Ethics Training, which is on January the 25th to January the 30th, 2021. And when you register, use the code words Life in Recovery to get 10% off the package price. Peace and love, and goodbye for now.